We have 7 readers tonight between poetry and fiction, and afterwards there's going to be lots of music. There's a benefit gig happening up here just after we finish, and there's going to be music downstairs as well, and I believe there's going to be music outside as well. They won't need any wind instruments anyway. So after the readings, after the quiet readings of poetry, there will be a blast of music from several locations around the place. So it promises to be a good evening overall. We are delighted to have in attendance this evening the Mayor of Galway to celebrate not just the launch of Crannóg 56, but our 20 years of publishing Crannóg. So she's going to say a few words to you. So would you please give a warm welcome to her worship, the Mayor of the City of Galway, Councillor Marian Coyne.
Mar vera cahan na Galway tá mé Harveh sásta bheith an seo vinne agus gur míle maithagad a san cuireadh a thuirt liomsa chun an Crannóg chuige sé a seoladh. As Mayor of Galway City, I'm delighted to be with you here this evening, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'd also, before I forget at the end, it's to thank Mick Crehan and his staff for having this launch here in what is one of the very recognised establishments for culture, for music, for poetry, for as long as I've been around, and that's quite a while. I passed many, when I was much younger, I passed many. It's a very good evening here. So again, just to acknowledge the contribution of Mick to culture, to the arts, to music. Crannóg is run by a voluntary editorial team of just 4 writers: Geraldine Burke, Tony O'Dwyer, Jarlath Fahey, and Sandra Bunting, who is now, I believe, in Canada on a more permanent basis. And I would just like, as Mayor, to commend their dedication and their commitment to culture and to arts, and in particular poetry and short stories. Every issue, as you know, has about 12 short stories, 35 poems, and an interview with an established writer. All of the issues of Crannóg are beautifully designed and beautifully produced, and I'm particularly impressed with the cover. It's very fitting for the world we live in today, to remind ourselves of our connection to nature, and I think that's particularly inspiring and particularly beautiful. And if we look for inspiration, it's in nature that we find it. And I'd also like to make reference to the anthology, the 2020, that was produced for Galway 2020, one of probably the more final things that come out of Galway 2020. And in particular, what is lovely to see is the piece of artwork by Patricia Burke-Brogan, who was recently honoured with Freedom of the City. And Patricia Burke-Brogan, as an artist, as a writer, as a poet, a multi-talented woman, very difficult times where society really was not ready for her. So it's lovely to see Patricia's piece of work there included on the front of the Crannóg 2020. As Tony mentioned earlier, tonight marks the 20th anniversary of Crannóg. And as a former editor myself in publishing many years ago, I can tell you it's extremely a formidable achievement to be around 20 years in the publishing world. It's really very, very significant, and to commend you for that. Crannóg's rapid growth is due to a consistent raising of standards in not only just production, the content, but also now of the fact that they have embraced new technology to widen its scope and compete out there with the best of literary magazines internationally. It also continues its efforts to grow the magazine and makes a very significant positive contribution to not only Galway's cultural life, but also the cultural life nationally. Its mission is to publish the work of Irish writers alongside the best available worldwide, and to show how well such writing sits with the best that is available internationally. More importantly, in this world, finance is always the issue. So Crannóg is financed by sales of the magazine. Subscriptions plus grants from the Arts Council and from Galway City Council are to be acknowledged. So there are piles out there, and let's all take a couple here and go out and support Crannóg, because that is the only way to show our support. Launches like this are also an important sales platform, as well as being a festive event on the Galway literary calendar, attracting as they do writers and supporters from across Ireland and sometimes abroad. So, Boakna Mogwikas Agawal Asan Soro Bajenka, Argus Tasula Gamavisha Tatnavas on law. Okay, Garamina Mag.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I know you have another engagement later on, but I hope you can stay on for some of the readings and some of the entertainment for the evening, which we'll now start with. And our first reader is Fred Johnston. Fred is from Belfast, and his most recent collection of poems is called Rogue States, and that was published by Salmon in 2019. In 2020 then he received an Arts Council literature bursary to complete a collection of short stories. And he's had poems published in The New Statesman, The Financial Times, The Guardian, The Spectator, including the current one, the Jubilee issue of The Spectator, picture of the Queen on the cover, The Irish Times, Ciphers, New Hibernia Review, and other such titles. So would you welcome to read his poem, Fred Johnston.
I was very pleased that Her Majesty the Queen allowed a portrait of herself to be used on the issue that contained my poem. Thank you very much for using this poem, Tony, and congratulations on yet another fine issue of the magazine. This is, the poem is called A Moral Question, and it's very easy these days particularly to be drawn into moral arguments about various conflicts that are going on. And I always get drawn into them in one sense or another, but when it comes to writing something about them, like a letter to a newspaper, for example, or God help us ringing Joe Duffy, the questions sometimes occurs to me, what right have we got to do this in a sense? Because it's very easy to sit over a mug of coffee in a sort of comfortable room here in the west of Ireland and protest indignantly about something that's going on in Afghanistan. We're never going to be there. We're never going to have that experience. And yet, what we have is this ability to get very worked up about it, very indignant, and nobody there is going to read our letter or a poem or anything else and be moved by it. So what's the point of it all? But yet we do it. Because there is the niggling aspect of it, in a sense, being a duty to at least write something about it, but how small it is, if you can't do anything else. So, hopefully that comes out in this. It's called A Moral Question. It seems a fraud, this, to offer an opinion from a safe distance, touching a flame but pulling back, a game of sorts, or worse, a fashion. A sticker on a car's rear window, or wearing your keffiyeh, but not too often, it's not easy to keep clean. Or signing one more petition in the safe high street. And there's always an irate poem or letter to a newspaper. They must be worth something. They must be worth something. And it's the thought that counts. Still, an ache that the thought is weightless. You keep that notion at arm's length. We can only do what we can do. It's not entirely a waste of anger, or so you tell yourself. But you are not among the ruins. You are not swallowing tear gas or making verses out of bandages, nor composing to the rhythm of hammering on your door. So you must wonder by what right. It's a moral question. You open yourself to any of it. You run no risk. You'd feel better, perhaps, if you did. But then and each time, an itch, a nudge, a wink from the heart, and from this other far place, you're putting new words in order, in spite of yourself, in spite of everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. That's a food for thought there. Our second reader is Marian Coyne. Marian is a writer based on the west coast of Ireland. Her poetry has been published widely in Europe and the UK, the US and elsewhere. Her book, her collection of poems, is called The Heart Uncut, and that was published in October 2020 by Words on the Street. And she is working on her second collection under the working title False Face and Fascist. So would you welcome please Marian Coyne.
First of all, thank you to Crannóg 56 for including me, and I have to say it's just, each cover gets better than the last one. It's just gorgeous. It will put you in a good mood just looking at it. Secondly, briefly, but although not so briefly, but lately, I would like to say thank you to Words on the Street editors Galway, Ger and Tony for publishing my book The Heart Uncut during that strange time, October 2020, when we were all sort of suspended in some kind of disbelief during the pandemic. It was a seamless process, at least for me. I'm not sure about you, but and it was a pleasure and a privilege to be published by you. So this poem, Metamorphosis, it's really about a cherry tree, actually. Back in 2011-12, we demolished a very old family home that we had lived in and needed demolishing, and applied for planning permission for a new one. And it was the time of crazy planning regs, which were for some people, but not for everyone. So we were told exactly where to build and how to build, and that was okay to a large extent. But there was a cherry tree planted by a close family member, then deceased, that in fact the planners didn't say anything about it, but everybody else seemed to think it ought to go. But I couldn't, and I wouldn't, and I certainly didn't. So this is about sort of murky thoughts about what if it had been taken down. So, Metamorphosis. Between our two lives, there is also the life of the cherry blossom, Basho. The chant to cut you down grew loud, citing danger with every storm. Too close, too wide, too deep at root. Unwieldy and wayward in your guardian spread. She walked away, ablaze from other people's needs, built on crassness and realism, the foes of creation. That night she dreamed they took you down. scaring root from earth, leaving a hole so cosmic the cosmos juddered, while the birds shrieked and bobbed in disarray. Lying in a shroud of cherry blossom, the dream wended its way through her, specificity its horror fuel. Wild with grief, she lopped off an ear to numb the senses, stay the echo of her animal howls. The keening lasted all night, loss her swamp, sly devils her captors. Dawn and a pearly flushed conch lay on the pillow, emitting a briny scent, twice removed from sea and sand. She rose and sashayed out, sweeping fresh clay along the path, descended down into the void, raised her arms to the sky, and listened with her conch ear to the wind psalms that would sway her new branches.
Okay, right, it's story time. Our first story of the evening comes from Evan McCann. Evan has been anthologized by Pankhurst Press in the UK, by New Binary Press, Prospero, Dura Press and Ireland House. And she has been shortlisted or placed in competitions like the WOW Award, Coach, the Colm Tobin, the Marie Edgeworth, and the Sunday Business Post Penguin Ireland competitions. Her first novel is Marina, and that was published by Words in the Street in 2018. And she is currently working on an audio comedy. So would you welcome, please, Evan McCann.
I'm so tall I should knee you ground. Thank you so much to Crannóg and the editorial board, and congratulations. This is my 6th time in Crannóg and 7th if you count the 2020 edition, and I haven't read in public since the very last day of lockdown. I was reading in the NYG and they were literally kind of pushing us out, and no pressure, but now I have to read in front of the mayor. So I'll give it a go anyway. So I think you said I could read the whole story? Sure, yeah. Okay, I'll see how long I last. So it's called The Healer. Patricia is Skyping Mary. Mary's fiancé Matteo appears now and then to announce his presence by waving at the screen. He laughs when they start talking about travelling to Abadania from the coast by train. He leans his head in over the keyboard to emphasise that there isn't exactly a network of trains on his continent, and suggests they go to Cancun instead. Patricia Skypes Mary again later, ready with jokes about conquistadores aimed at Matteo and his pale brown skin. She refers to the fact that Irish helped his country break free of the colonial yoke. He announces his departure from the room loudly. They agree on dates and then hang up to book the flights. A month later, Mary tells Patricia she is pregnant. Patricia feels the sucker punch in the gut but smiles and mimes the congratulations dance she has become so good at. Patricia offers to let her back out of the trip, but Mary has to cross the border every 3 months because of her visa. Latino fiancé or no, they arrange to meet at the airport. Patricia flies out the day after the big conference at work. She tells them all laughingly that she's going there for plastic surgery. After the second flight, Patricia has an all-day stopover in Rio. She wants to see Christ the Redeemer, but imagines a taxi driver might drive her into favela and have her killed. Through the high windows of the airport, she sees the dry hills that surround the city. The only sightseeing she does is that of local women, their impossible curves sculpted perfectly into their tight clothes. They drive from Brasilia Airport in the early light. Through the tinted glass windows of the black sedan that comes with the driver, they see brown grilled shutters pulled down around every building. Mary says it's the same in Santiago, where she lives, 4,000 miles away. Everywhere in this capital city, cut out of the jungle in a 1950s resurgence of colonialism, there are billboards with sketches of luxury apartments that will be built. When they work out the price in euros, they're not as cheap as they expect. On the motorway, they pass bleak, empty buildings, gutted and sprayed with ominous graffiti. They do not cross any railway lines. They do not see any jungle. The main street in the village is made of red dirt. The posada is down a smaller dirt road off the main street. A teenage security guard comes out to greet them from a shack by a fleur-de-lis iron gate. His t-shirt says, "Filthy stinking rich." Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. He asks the driver to make them translate the t-shirt's message when he sees them stare. When they explain, he laughs uproariously and reveals 2 missing front teeth. The door to their room is made of corrugated steel and opens in from a courtyard. There are 2 narrow wooden beds under the iron bars of the window. After lunch on the porch, the owner, a white-haired American woman, says that a local woman does manicures and it'd be good for them to support her. Patricia did 3 languages for her leaving cert, so she tries to converse with the manicurist. But the woman is making slicing motions across her throat between the coats of nail varnish. Patricia thinks she is saying that several women have been murdered here in this very posada. She is alarmed, so doesn't try to contradict the white daisies she is painting on her toes, though she thinks they are tacky. When she tells Mary about the garbled conversation, Mary touches her belly in alarm. When the rain comes down, it is warm and heavy and floods the street. Ducks, ducklings, dogs, puppies and small children appear. When the sun comes back and bakes it all to red again, Patricia and Mary go for a walk. They see houses with no windows and no doors. There is a woman with a baby on her back going through the bins. There is a family living in a garage. The poverty proliferates the further away from the posada that they go, as do the sports bars and the small menacing men glaring out from under their baseball caps. It's all too much for them and their European guilt, so they turn back. They buy 2 of the crude, heart-shaped wind chimes made of copper and dirty unpolished crystals that are hanging across the door of the garage. The kids grin as they watch their father twist copper wire with pliers, reshape it into free rings to go with their purchases. They buy fake designer flip-flops in the shop like a shed. They buy hammocks to bring home that they will never put up. The rings turn their fingers green by nightfall. In the evening, there is an 80s film that they've never heard of in the courtyard of the juice bar. The electricity goes, shutting down the film and the street lights, enveloping them in darkness full of the sound of crickets. Patricia looks around to see if anyone is going to do anything, but people just sit there quietly, listening to the screaming insects until it comes back on. On Saturday, the locals open the boots of their cars, which contain huge speaker systems. Reggaeton blasts out and they all dance in the red roads. The armed police stand watching, with guns and truncheons strapped to their belts. Patricia doesn't try to talk to the locals after the experience with the manicurist. Instead, they sit in the juice bar and talk to the new arrivals from Europe and the US. People with wigs or bald heads, people in wheelchairs, people on crutches. There's a gift shop that sells New Age books, crystals and religious paraphernalia. They buy pink crystal rosary beads and wear them around their neck like everyone else. When Mary falls asleep early, Patricia goes back to the juice bar alone. She gets locked in a toilet until a woman from Cork, who tells her voluntarily that she is allergic to everything chemical, gets her out. Patricia asks her if she's ever seen the healer do physical operations. She says she hasn't, except on YouTube, and even then she couldn't watch it through. A German guy at the table next to them says he happened upon the last time he was there. He saw a woman sliced open with a pair of nail scissors, a yellow lump pulled out of her back. He says she was in a trance, that she did not scream or seem to feel any pain. There's a man with Lyme disease staying at the posada. He's from San Francisco. His whole bedside locker is filled with pill bottles. He cannot stop shaking. He has been here twice before and buys them green coconuts punched open with straws sticking out. They lie in the hammocks under the mango trees and talk about the other guests. The 2 young Australian guys who are covered in tattoos and piercings with stretchers in their ears. They are junkies looking for a cure, an end to the roller coaster of on-off addiction, an end to the cycle of rehab, partying, rehab. The couple with dreadlocks who wear clothes decorated with small mirrors and bright braiding. They have a small dirty toddler who wanders around the enclosed courtyard with only a shrunken t-shirt on, while her parents Skype her maternal grandfather, loudly asking for money for a flight to Peru so they can do an ayahuasca ritual in the jungle. The kitchen staff stare at the half-naked child and mutter about white people and how they bring up their children. Patricia tries to explain in her mixture of French and Spanish that they are the exception, not the rule, but the women shake their heads and get back to the cooking. The guests share an early dinner of salads and pinto beans on the porch. Hummingbirds drink from the gladioli as they eat. The Australian guys say that after an AA meeting the night before, they saw green and red streaks of light rising off the centre like ladder lasers to the sky. The landlady has framed pictures of a similar phenomenon. Although there are no shops that sell anything other than sweets or gifts, there are pharmacies everywhere, white, clean pharmacies that develop the photos at Western prices, photos that prove that there are unseen orbs of light everywhere in the village. Everyone assumes Patricia has cancer. She doesn't contradict them. When the other guests ask Mary why she is here, she smiles and touches her stomach. She is serene, Madonna-like. She is showing already and crocheting a purple and green blanket for the baby. Patricia wants to be happy for her, but she has tried Clomid, glucophage, naltrexone, tamoxifen, and has had a laparoscopy. She has had transvaginal ultrasounds being examined inside out, files and files of blood taken from the crook of her elbow, but nothing seems to be wrong. She has tried 2 rounds of IVF, though she has balked at surrogacy or adoption. She has gone to a homeopath, an acupuncturist, a Reiki healer, a Mayan masseuse, and has joined a mindfulness class. On Monday morning, they dress in white because that is the rule here. They go to the centre twice a day and again on Tuesday and Wednesday. From the outside it looks like a barn. Before they go in, they write down why they are here on small white pieces of white paper, and it's translated for them to pass to the healer. They are only permitted to sit in the antechamber because they are new. They are surrounded by statues of the Black Madonna, pink and white lumps of crystal, and big bunches of flowers, mostly pink roses. Julie Andrews sings Edelweiss through the speakers. They cannot cross their legs or arms and must sit still for hours in the wooden church pews with their eyes closed. A fat blonde woman pokes them with a long ruler if they transgress. When the meditation reaches a steady pulse, they line up to walk past the car dealer, who is a healer 3 days a week, who incarnates into various saints and doctors from the past so he can perform miracles. He is surrounded by men and women in white who stand by his ornate wooden throne guarding him. His eyes change colour every time they pass. Sometimes he nods at a woman in the line and she is taken by the arm through a door behind the throne. Patricia imagines him ripping out her ovaries with a blunt scalpel or cutting off her breasts with a rusty saw. In between the meditation days, they drink juice or lie in the hammock sweating. They go to a waterfall, a single stream pouring over a boulder just over head height. They go there with permission from the healer, a scribble in pencil written on one of the small white scraps of paper. On the long hot path, the red earth shines with specks of crystal. They see geckos and pink, yellow and green spotted butterflies. Patricia stands under the water in her togs and feels the water wash away all her cynicism and bitchiness. It's easy to believe anything here. A huge blue amorphous butterfly flaps across the forest path as she waits for Mary to finish her turn. When she next walks down the line at the centre, Patricia cries like she has never cried before, a racking, all-body sobbing, and after she feels a white calm. Patricia changes the message on her scrap of paper. She wants to feel like this forever. Baby or no baby, this is all she wants now, to be present, to believe in magic again.
Our next reader is Stephen Shields. Stephen is all the way from Knockray. He's both a poet and a prose writer, and his work has been published widely in journals in Ireland and in the UK. So to read his poem, The Man Who Swam Like Head, would you welcome please Stephen Shields.
you hear me there? Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thanks to Tony, Gary, and Geraldine, and at least Sandy. This poem, sometimes I wonder, do you explain a poem or do you not? But inevitably, I misunderstand somebody or they misunderstand me. So I'll just briefly say this refers back to my childhood, when my introduction to the world would have been the dandy or the beano. But one day I was brought to Salt Hill, and for the first time ever I saw the sea. So this is how my reaction went. A young man who has no experience really. A man who swam to Blackhead. My uncle's woolen togs sagged. A man swam to Blackhead, he said. He pointed beyond the beach, beyond the sea, but I could not find a blackhead. People gathered in groups upon the sand. Matrons in flowered swimming hats did the dead man's float. Some men plied the water with a hesitant crawl. Further out, his bald head glinting like a fish, the man who swam to Blackhead ignored the crowd and frolicked among the octopi, the jellyfish. I thought I saw a walrus.
Thank you, Stephen. I do think it's a good idea when people give the background to their poems. It can certainly add to the experience. If we're back to stories now, our next reader is San Quill. And San is a TV scriptwriter. She writes for RTE's popular soap opera Fair City. She also writes for children's TV, such as Becca's Bunch, Little Roy, Jessie and Nessie. Haven't seen any of those. And has worked also as a theatre actress. She was selected by the Irish Writers' Centre in 2017 as a Novel Fair finalist. Her poem Mosaic was part of the Greystones Poetry Trail in 2020. And she wrote and read a personal piece called Goodbye to Renting on RTE Radio 1's Sunday Miscellany in May of 2021. So to read her story, Mighty, would you welcome San Quill?
Thanks very much. This is my first time to be published in Crannóg, so thank you, Tony, thank you, Ger, and all at Crannóg. I'm delighted to be here all the way from County Wicklow. So my story is called Mighty. My name is Muireann. My mother calls me Muireann the mermaid, but I have no tail. I have 2 legs, just like you, but my skin is covered in scales. Scaly, scabby, flaky, freaky. These are the names they call me in school, the names I hear. They might say worse ones behind my scaly back. I am a good swimmer. I am strong and graceful in the water, not so much on land. I have long strawberry blonde hair and my body is thin, but my arms and legs can travel fast when I swim. The spotty teenage lifeguard in our local pool called my backstroke mighty. The problem is I can't swim the local school anymore. Children cry and mothers complain. Oh, look at her poor skin. Is that contagious? Don't touch her just in case. Better not swap towels, you never know. They say these things out loud, as if I cannot hear them. Hello, I'm right here in front of you. Look, me and my scaly skin in the turquoise swimsuit. I am here. In the showers, my mother raises her voice and speaks clearly so the children and mothers will understand. My daughter has psoriasis, she says, and she pronounces it slowly for them, psoriasis. It is a skin disorder. It is not contagious, not at all. It's a condition, a bit like asthma actually, except you can see it. My daughter is beautiful, your comments are not. And with that she takes my hand and we leave the shower area and walk through the changing room. We go outside into the car park with our swimming bags. We are still wearing our dripping swimsuits and flip-flops. It is freezing. In the car our bottoms wet the seats. Mum tries to turn on the heating but she forgets it is broken. She wallops the steering wheel with her open hand. Her face is wet,
but I am not sure if that is swimming pool wet or saltwater tears wet. We are going to go home and have hot chocolate, she says, like this is an important decision. We do not go back to the local swimming pool. Instead, every Sunday morning, Mum and I go swimming in the Irish Sea. Mermaids swim in the sea, Mum says. It is their natural habitat. The salt and seaweed is good for my psoriasis, although it does sting when I get in, especially if my psoriasis has been bleeding. It stings, but then as I swim, the cold of the Irish Sea stings even more, in a good way. It's a tingling mingle of stinginess, and I love it. My legs feel like they are burning, but my face cannot stop grinning. I run down the steps and jump straight in. My mother inches in, toe by toe, with little squeals emerging from her mouth. Sometimes she curses under her breath. But once she's in, fully immersed, apart from her head, she too gets that frozen smile, the I can't bear this cold, but God, I love it smile. One Sunday, I get out of the sea and Mum is wrapped in her purple towel, laughing with two other women. One of them is handing Mum a cup of something hot. I can see the steam rising off it. Mum takes the green plastic cup and smiles, even though she doesn't know the name of these women yet. As I dry myself, I listen to their chattiness. Go on, have a flapjack. Go on, I made them this morning. The other woman laughs. You big liar. Who do you think you are, Nigella? You bought them in Tesco, so you did. 6 for €2. The women giggle again, high-pitched from the cold and the slagging. Mum joins in. She looks pretty when she laughs. The hot drink is chocolate, and the lady who did or didn't make the flapjacks offers me one, but I refuse. I want it so badly, but yet I say no. Mum guesses I'm being shy. This is my daughter, Wirral. She's my mermaid. The ladies smile at me and say I have lovely hair. They debate whether the colour is strawberry blonde or caramel. I wonder what they think about my skin. They don't look. They don't ask. They don't mention it. Sometimes children say too much, and adults say too little. Since then, we meet the same women every Sunday. Mum chats, and I am silent. But I like hearing their coziness, their teasing, their laughter. One wild and cold Sunday when the sea is full tide, I bring brownies I baked myself, and the ladies ooh and ah over them, telling me what a good baker I am, and how beautiful my hair is, and how I am the best swimmer in the Irish Sea. Mum beams with pride. I do blush a little, but I am not as embarrassed as I let on. I enjoy their compliments and their kindness. Just at that moment, I hear a terrified scream. A frantic mother is shouting and pointing at the sea. Her daughter, a girl half my size, is in trouble. The little girl jumped off the rocks and she's in too deep. I run. I don't think, or maybe I do think, too much sometimes, Mum says. My body moves fast. I sprint, I jump, I swim. I am a mermaid. I can do this. I can save this girl. I hear the screaming and roaring from the shore. The girl's mother, my mother. If I drown, Mum will kill me. I plunge under the waves and I swim with all my might. My open eyes are sore. I can't see her. I feel the panic rise in my belly. What am I doing? But no, there she is, limp and sinking. I grab her. It's not how I imagined it. It's not like in the movies. She's small but heavy, and I am pulling and dragging her, and I can't breathe, and I kick upwards, but just as I open my mouth to gulp some air, a wave crashes over me, and in that split second, water pours down my throat. I want to vomit. We go under again, and I see her terrified green eyes stare into mine. I am a mermaid, I tell myself. I have no fear. I am a mermaid. My scales will save me. My scales will save her. I kick hard to bring us up, but she is pulling me, dragging me down. It's getting darker. Down, down we go, holding each other, staring at each other. She sinks. I sink. I feel pressure on my arm and I'm pulled up, through the cloudy darkness. I see her green eyes. I see the grey sky. I gasp. I don't remember anymore. When I open my eyes, my mother and the spotty lifeguard from the local pool are looking at me. I am wrapped in a tinfoil blanket. There is an ambulance, too much noise and too many people. Mum's lady friends are looking at me, anxiously. One is holding the flask and the other is gripping my tub of brownies. Is she alive? I splutter. Mum nods and starts to cry. Don't you dare do that again, she says, wiping her eyes and stroking my arm. Did I save her? I ask. You saved her, And Mark saved you, Mum answers. I look at the boy called Mark and make a promise in my head never to call him Spotty again. He has a lovely smile. A lot of spots, but a lovely smile. Hi, he says. You're a good swimmer, but you're not a lifeguard, you big idiot. I don't know what to say to that, so I say nothing. Mum's swimmy friends give Mark and me a hot chocolate and one of my brownies each. A crying woman runs over and hugs me, then she hugs Mark and then Mum. She tries to say thank you, but she only manages to mouth the words through her tears and then races back to the ambulance and her little girl. Mark says he's teaching a lifeguard class at the local pool. He suggests I take the course. We don't go to the local pool anymore, I say. Why not? I have psoriasis, I tell him. Oh, what's that? I show him my arms, my legs, flaky, scaly, scabby, freaky. Mark asks if it's contagious, and for the first time ever, the question doesn't make me feel angry or sad. I tell him it's not, it's just something I have. You're grand so. Mum and me look at each other and smile. The class is on Saturday morning, 9:30, don't be late. Mark walks away, taking another brownie as he goes. Mum puts her arms around me. We sit on the ground for a while, looking out to sea. Let's go home, she says. Before we walk away, I look down into the Irish Sea. It's dark, murky and dangerous. I want to learn to dive into its depths. I want to learn to breathe under its waves. I want to learn to save lives. I want to be a lifeguard. My name is Marian. I have psoriasis. I am not a mermaid. I am a mighty swimmer.
Okay, so our next reader is Pat Mullen. Pat is a thriller writer. He's also a poet and an artist. He's a member of International Thriller Writers. His novels, his poetry and short stories are published in the US, in Ireland, and in the UK. His website is patmullen.com. And he has a new book out, I believe.
Yes,
He might tell us more about that himself. So would you welcome, please, Pat Mullen.
Don't you think it was a big magazine, isn't it? I think the inside is pretty good as well. Thank you, sir. Well, I brought mine along a little larger these days. Watch out, you get it. You do. Take you back a while. Back to about 65 years ago, as a matter of fact. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Seeing I'm only 37 myself. I'm sure most of you have been to New York City, or not. If you haven't, you should go there. This takes you back to a very strange night that many of you may not have heard of. It's called the Blackout. In 1965, the grid from Canada to the eastern part of the US broke. And everything went out. All the lights, everything. Can you imagine Manhattan, a large city like that, in the evening, with no electricity, no elevators running, no subways running? And I worked in Manhattan at the time. I just come out of the US Army a year, I'm from Derry, by the way, a year before. And I had an apartment in the Bronx and a job in Manhattan. And I rode every night the IRT subway train up to the Bronx. That's what this is about. But I think as you read it, you'll find a sense of apprehension. It's called Blackout. I rode the New York subway last night, just like every night. My lifeline from Manhattan to the Bronx. Oblivious of the clacks and clonks and the crunch of human bodies. I trusted it to take me safely through. I watched my fellow passengers squeeze tight together at every station, making room for there was none, hanging on to a space hard won, warily watching each new face that joined us as the door slammed shut. I rode the New York subway that night, just like every night. A squeamish stomach in the morning, it never served me well, as I pushed into the garlic smell from those who'd eaten an alien meal, and I often guarded against an opportune feeling. But in the very same milieu, I learned a deeper lesson too. When a young man got up his hard-earned seat to get a lady off her feet, but when I observed the unlikely reader, one with hand-worked hands, used chipped fingernails to turn the page. I rode the New York subway that night, just like every night. At each new station, the doors would open to let some disembark and many others board. And I'd watch the passing parade on the platform. Strident, smart, sluggish, anxious, impatient. Briefcases or bags, or nothing at all. Newspapers clasped or open, or none at all. Studiously avoiding each other, the body language of survival. I rode the New York subway that night, just like every night. Sometimes the train would stop dead between stations without explanation. And we'd wait in the stifling heat, silently suffering, sweating together, waiting patiently for a reprieve, always knowing that it would come, trusting that train to see us through before we succumbed to claustrophobia or lost our cool and blew it too. And then that numbing feeling as we moved on and the tunnel lights flashed by, hypnotizing us as we thundered through the ink-blank tunnel. I rode the New York subway last night, just like every night. That's just a preface to my story, so I'll finish it very shortly. I don't want to keep it longer, but that is a slice taken out of that evening. That train did not take me through. Just about that point, everything stopped. All the trains stopped, all the lights went out. So I was in a black mess, black inside, 2 levels down. And we actually were lucky in one sense and unlucky in another. We stopped at 125th Street in Harlem. So right in the middle of Black America, which was fantastic. I mean, everybody could see nobody. Nobody could see anybody. So I think someone got someone from the subway people, and they guided us out of the train, up 2 levels of stations to the street. And I was lost then. People seemed to scatter different directions. And I didn't know what to do. It was 125th Street, and my apartment was at 178th Street in the Bronx, which was about 50 blocks north of that. At least if you walked a 5 to 6 hour walk or more, maybe, if you don't know you were going. And as I stood there, this gentleman came along, this black man, which I wasn't in the midst of African Americans to that degree anymore. At work, yes, occasionally. But there he was with a flashlight in his hand. And he came up to me and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "To the Bronx." And he said, "Just follow me." Took the flashlight and he led me for 2 to 3 or 4 streets. He joined another man who then took me for another 5 streets. And they passed flashlight to flashlight, and they started a relay system, all those wonderful African Americans from Harlem, guiding me all the way through Harlem, all the way to the South Bronx. And eventually, I think about that time in the night, or the early day, a bit of light had been entering the sky. And I made it all the way home, and that's the moral of the entire story, I think. I hope you enjoyed it.
Great, thanks very much, Pat. What a great story behind that poem. David Butler was to be our penultimate reader, but we had one person who didn't show up, so he is in fact our ultimate reader. And David's third novel is called City of Dis, and that was published by New Island. And it was shortlisted for the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year in 2015. His second short story collection is called Fugitive, and that's published by Ireland House. And a third poetry collection, Liffey Sequence, published by Dara Press, that were both published in 2021. And Liffey Sequence actually has a very good review in the current issue of Poetry Ireland Review. He's also won prizes for the short story, the Fish International, the ITT Red Line, the Maria Edgeworth, which he won twice, and the Benedict Kiley Awards. So to read his story, would you welcome David Butler?
Absolutely delighted to be back here in the Crane. I think it's my fourth story in Crannóg, so
Even horse record.
absolutely there's no competition here, but sincere thanks to yourself and to Claire, and a great achievement, 20 years of poetry. The only thing you need to know about this story, I suppose, is it's set in the 60s, and it's called The Witch. The Hegarty place was a half mile out the canal between the lock and the Humpback Bridge. It was on the far side, which only had a rough path running along it. It wasn't what you'd call a house either, more a couple of shacks thrown together slapdash in a yard full of nettles and burdocks and an old bathtub. Before planning permission was a thing, their dad said. Joseph Donlan, TD, had been town councillor before he got into the Dáil on the third count. An owl sympathy vote, Blinky Roach sneered, giving Joey a sneaky dig in the back. Because it was only a year after their mother died. Blinky Roach's dad had been deselected by the party for openly criticising Mr. Lamass. Siobhan once asked her dad how come such a monstrosity had been allowed in the first place. After that, Joey could never think of the Hegarty place without thinking of the word monstrosity. And the bloody mongrel that was kept chained to the gate was a right monster you'd want to steer well clear of any time you were passing there on your bike. At one time, there was meant to be a whole tribe of Hegarty children running wild out there. But now it was just Bridie Hegarty, living on her own with cats and hens and a goat, and that vicious old tyke she kept chained to the gate. She looked like a red Indian squaw, face all wrinkled and smoky, hair a mad grey tangle. All her kids were taken off her by social services, Siobhan said. And weren't they right, said her Aunt Clara, and her a dipso. It must be sad, though, to have all your kids taken away. There were all sorts of stories doing the rounds about Bridie Hegarty. How she was an old witch who sowed ragwort in fields at night to poison the cattle. How she could make an animal miscarry by giving it the evil eye. How she drowned puppies in a rough sack. How she was arrested twice for drunken disorderly, and once for scratching the policeman's face who was arresting her. But there were other stories. How she'd been a nurse over in England during the war. Then she'd come back afterwards with an English squaddy who had skin grafts and nightmares where he shouted out. It was that squaddy who knocked together the shacks out on old Dinny Hegarty's scrap of land out the canal. Then within the year he'd up and left, though Titch Brennan said that wasn't true, and that Bridie Hegarty kept him chained up inside the shack to this day. Siobhan said that no one knew who the fathers of Bridie Hegarty's kids were, only that every one of them had a different father. Auntie Kira clucked and made a sour face when she said that. Siobhan was a Mount Anville girl now. Even before the by-election, she had made up her mind to go to boarding school up in Dublin. Joey could never get his head around why. He'd have sworn she was happy here, even after it was just the three of them. Or the four of them, counting Aunt Kira, who'd moved in to look after their mother when she was dying of cancer, and then stayed on in the spare room. And Kira was a spinster. That was a funny word because it made Joey think of the skinny little spindle that was always spinning around on top of the Singer sewing machine she worked every evening. But Kira Donlan wasn't skinny. She was hefty and pious. His dad said that about her, even though she was his own flesh and blood. Siobhan always seemed to be in flying form any weekend she came home, with her stories of high jinks in the dormitories and eccentric nuns and the films they got to watch every Friday night. It's a top school, Joey, his father explained to him that first night on their own when he couldn't sleep because his gut was hollowed out and emptiness was like a fist jammed in his throat. Siobhan's the girl for getting ahead. You watch and you learn, boy. With a good education behind her, there'll be no stopping her. And sure enough, she comes second in her class that year in the intercert. Though their dad went spare when he saw the miniskirt and beetle boots she wanted to go out in to celebrate. It was a real gut punch when Joey heard she wasn't going to be coming home for the midterm. Siobhan always came home for Halloween. It was Siobhan who carved the pumpkin into the jack-o'-lantern and sliced up the barn rack so each of them got something, and Siobhan organised the games their mam used to organise, ducking for sixpences, or trying to bite coins out of the hanging apple with your hands tied behind your back. The threepenny bit was the easiest because it had so many corners. It was Siobhan who'd taken them down to the huge bonfire they always had on the green in the council estate. Every year they'd stack tyres and all sorts of rubbish for weeks beforehand, even though the guards were forever saying it was illegal. Then a couple of weeks ago he'd overheard his dad and Siobhan having a real shouting match on the phone. He was upstairs in his room and all he heard through the floorboards was his dad's side. I will not stand by and have this family disgraced, and if your poor mother was alive, and have you no thought for anyone but yourself? And after that his dad had been livid for days, barely speaking to him, Joey, though it was hardly his fault. And the upshot was, Siobhan wouldn't be coming home for Halloween this year. And to make matters worse, their dad would be staying over up in Dublin too, on Dáil business he said, so Joey was supposed to stay stuck in the house with Auntie Ciara for company. So when Titch Brennan and Billy Roach said they were planning a raid on the Hegarty place, with bangers and sparklers and a couple of fireworks smuggled down from the north by Roach's dad, and was he game for it, Joey said yeah. But all day it gave him a worry pain, and it wasn't because he was scared either. It was because one day back in 4th class he was playing soldiers with Stephen Madden down by the lock when Bridie Hegarty came along, wrapped up in that filthy coat she always wore that smelled of piss and was more a blanket with buttons than a coat. And Stephen Madden, who was a bit of a daredevil, stood out in front of her and asked her straight out, what was it like during the war? She looked shocked to hear the question. She was too used to school kids sniggering and mocking and firing stones at her shack from the town side of the canal. And the upshot was, she brought Stephen Madden in past the dog, who just sniffed at him, and on into her shack. And when he returned, he had a wooden box the squatty must have left behind, with medals and cap badges and bullet cases, and best of all, an iron cross that he took off a dead Jerry. All that cheer, that box was their treasure chest in the secret den that even Siobhan didn't know about. But then Stephen Madden's family moved away. Titch Brennan said they weren't doing no cowardly long-range attack from the town side of the canal like the St. Declan boys. They were going all the way inside the compound, so they were. There was a gap in the fence round the back where the mongrel couldn't see them, and even if he could, the chain wouldn't reach. They'd rendezvous at the lock at 2000 and go in after dark. Then they'd make their getaway down the other direction to where the humpback bridge was. Joey knew well he'd get into trouble. After tea, Auntie Ciara said it was okay for him to go trick-or-treating, but not to go anywhere near the bonfire on the council estate, and to be sure to be back home by 8 o'clock. He was 11 for God's sake. Besides, 8 o'clock was no damn good. They were only meeting up at 8 o'clock. If his dad had been home, he'd never have dared stay out, that's for sure. It was overcast, but it looked like the drizzle would hold off. They lay at the gap in the wire fence, all three of them, their faces darkened with mud like commandos. But first they needed a volunteer to do a recce. And since Joey hadn't brought any of the ammunition, Titch Brennan said it was down to him to go in. There was no electricity in the Hegarty place, but there must have been an oil lamp lit, because it was a buttery light glowing from the back window. His heart hammering, Joey crawled through the gap in the fence. Twice he looked back at the 4 eyes that were peering after him from between the dock leaves. The sick yellow moon smouldering behind the clouds seemed to give those eyes a malevolent glimmer. There was a coal scuttle by the old bathtub. He hauled it over to the window, slowly so as not to let it clank. Then he carefully climbed onto it to have a look in. Everything was blurred. It was as if the glass was sweating on the inside. But there, sprawled on the kitchen table inside the window, he made out something absolutely crazy. It was shaped like a huge white letter M. But it was like the graffiti M scrawled up in the jacks that Blinky Roach had shown him and sniggered at. An M that was meant to be a pair of women's legs spread out, knees up with their bits on show. And there on the kitchen table, through the blur, the feet of the M had stockings on, and now he could make out the rest of the girl's body lying down flat on the table, going away from him, and a skirt thrown up over her tummy. And now at the end, stooping between the stocking feet, there was Bridie Hegarty's head, all bleary like it was underwater. But he knew it from the tangle of greasy hair that fell thick as brambles. But what was she doing? She had some sort of a plastic bottle or tube in her hand, and then the other person, the one flat on the table, moved her head and seemed to look up straight at him, and Jesus, oh Jesus Christ, oh Jesus Christ. The coal scuttle teetered and his leg slipped. He crashed over, upending it. And at once the mongrel let out a torrent of barks, and he heard the chain rattle and catch. And he was already scrambling for it. He tumbled out over the fence and ran like crazy. Ran away from the cascade of barking in the direction of the bridge this time, ran blindly, heart hammering and breath raw and eyes wobbly with tears. And just when he got to the bridge, he ran straight bang into his father, which was crazy, because his father was up in Dublin. But there was the TD's Hillman Minx, parked in where you couldn't see it from the road. And that was his dad's heavy tweed overcoat he was grabbing hold of and burying his nose into. Joey looked up into the shocked white face and he cried, "Da, she's got Siobhan! Da, we got to help her! She's got Siobhan inside there, Da!" But already the gloved hand was clamped tight over his mouth and his father's voice hissed, "Would you shut up to fuck for Christ's sake, Joey?" Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Another great story. And that concludes the readings for the evening. It only remains for me to thank, first of all, our worship the Mayor for being in attendance and for her kind words. Yes, you may give the Mayor a round of applause in her absence. I want to thank all the readers, all 7 of you, who read entertainingly, and in fact, I want to thank all the contributors. Many of them also can't be here for distance reasons, etc. I want to thank the editorial board, my fellow editors, Geraldine Burke and Jarlath Fahy, and over in Canada, Sandra Bunting. And hello Sandy, if you're watching. Sandy also sources the cover art for each issue of Crannóg, and does a great job, I think. The current image is called Flora, would you believe, and it's by Pamela Steibel, who's a New York-based artist. Also want to thank the Crane for hosting us for almost 20 years now of launches, over 50 launches. And last but not least, yourselves. You've been a great audience. You can give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for your attention for the evening.